Welcome to Prep 2050 Survival Academy, where we go beyond the prep. Today, we will take a deep dive into the magical world of mushroom growing and why you should start thinking about adding them to your preps. Our guest is the founder of MushLoveTexas and can be found at MushLoveTexas on Instagram. I encourage you to check out his page after you hear our engaging conversation about his journey into becoming a mushroom boutique owner and how mushrooms are not quite as hard to grow as one may think. If you're ever in the greater Houston area and you can make the trip to Tom Ball Farmers Market, where Ian sets up shop, then please be sure to visit him. And without further ado, let me introduce you guys to Ian from MushLoveTexas. Is it fungi or fungi?
That I do know. I would say it's probably fungi with a hard G, because you would say, like, if you have fungal infection or something like that, it'd be fungal. So
What are some of the benefits of growing your own mushrooms?
the biggest benefit, I'd say, really is you get the most fresh mushrooms possible. And when people say fresh, they think of, like, let's say, like a fresh piece of fruit or a fresh, maybe even lettuce leaf, like a microgreen or something like that. But really, with mushrooms, it's a whole other level, because the mushrooms that you find in nature sometimes will be fruited and then gone within a few days. Whereas an apple you could throw in a cellar and that'll be good for months. So it really is a race against time. And that's kind of what makes it so difficult as well. But essentially, that's the main advantage. It's you're able to have a higher level of control. So you get a higher quality, like bigger yields. You also get fresher fruits from it. So that's really the main thing, is you are, as soon as the thing reaches your level of perfection, you can pick it and you can eat it. You don't need to rely on a store.
And then how does the benefits compare to store-bought mushrooms?
The main benefit, I'd say, there is store-bought. First of all, the whole picking and packaging process, that again takes time, and that means you sacrifice a little bit of freshness. And then you also don't really know where it's coming from, or the substrate that it was grown on, whether they were naturally foraged. I suppose you could find out. Most of them are produced, like essentially cultivated, but whether they were naturally foraged or whether they were produced. So there is definitely a lower level of control. And as mushrooms age, the nutrient content, just like anything else, the nutrient content will go down slightly. Some of the benefits, just like anything, will start to not decompose, but they'll be less fresh. And so, yeah, I would say the main benefit really is control. You have a control over the freshness. You have a control over the nutrient content. For instance, if you eat younger, let's say, like I grow a lot of blue oysters right now. If you eat younger blue oysters, there is a higher content of all the good stuff that makes it beneficial for you.
And I remember you saying too that mushrooms have a lot of protein. Is it just mushrooms in general or the blue oyster specifically?
Just the blue oyster specifically. There's a lot of other mushroom species, I guess you could say, out there that are that have protein content, but the blue oyster is definitely the highest protein content. Yeah, they do have a lot of other benefits too, though, mainly being fiber, I would say. They're also really good because they have so much protein and because they have so little carbohydrates, little sugar, that they're good for people with diabetes. They also benefit people who have, let's say, cardiovascular problems. It's just a whole plethora of different health benefits you can get out of eating mushrooms beyond just a good protein alternative.
Yeah, I had no idea that it would help with other ailments like diabetes because you don't, or cardiovascular, I'm sorry, because you think about that when you, it's like my thought is always just like the little, I don't know, the portobello ones at the store. And I never thought that they tasted good until my friend was like, no, you have to go to a farmer's market. And then it just totally like opened up my eyes to really they taste better, different varieties, and there's so much, like you mentioned, that you can do with them. So I'm curious about what got you into mushrooms.
Yeah, the main thing that got me into mushrooms was back in 2020. I'll give you kind of a little bit of backstory. Back in 2020, end of 2019, early 2020, I got a house, and I moved out of an apartment. And my whole life, I've always wanted to build a business. And I was like, all right, I got a house. And then my friend moved in. So I got a roommate now, and we're just talking all the time about all these different crazy, because we had always lived near each other, but now we're living closer proximity. So we just talk about all kinds of crazy stuff. And for a while, we were talking about these, like, you listen to like the Joe Rogan podcast and all these other podcasts, and they talk about these crazy theories of like ancestral mushrooms and origins of, of like people and animals and plants, and how there's this cooperation between all the different organisms through these like mycelial networks and all these crazy theories. So I was like, oh, this warrants more research. And so I started looking into it, and I realized people were cultivating these in their homes. So I was like, all right, cool. We're still in the pandemic. I'm going to build a business out of this, because before that, being a tech guy, I was always interested. Like before in my previous life, I was doing my own tech service for people on the side. And then when I moved here, basically it's corporate 9 to 5, but I realized that you could grow a significant amount of mushrooms, food, medicine, what have you, in your own home with very little overhead in terms of electricity, very little overhead in terms of, I guess you could say, things that could go wrong, like systems. And yeah, that's basically what got me into it. I was just fascinated with learning about how they grow, learning about the benefits of them. And yeah, it was just fascinating to me. So I'm like, let me try this as a business. And then everything started just working out. I got my first, essentially a grow kit. You can buy sterilized grain. You just buy the syringes with either spores or liquid cultures that have tissue in them, and you just inject them into the grain. And then before you know it, you have colonized grain. You can break that out. And so I was like just playing with it, experimenting with different things. And eventually I got my first yield, and I was like, wow, you can actually make food out of this. We cooked them up the same night, and it worked out well. So that's kind of the story of how I got into this whole thing. And the rest is just expanding.
Excited to see you expand, because I'm waiting for the lion's mane mushroom. I'm one for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I actually just got some lion's mane from the Mycelium Emporium. It's a website, and this guy who runs it, Lenny Rockwell, it's got really, really great cultures. He curates them himself, and everything I've gotten from him has just been phenomenal. Super fast to colonize, which I know explain a little bit about that, but colonizing is just when you inject, it's inoculating the tissue into a sterile medium, like that has some food in it. Like in my case, it's grain. It's rye berries, Elben rye. And then it goes through, it eats as much as it can to grow out its mycelium. And then after that, you break it out into bulk substrate, like sawdust or something like that. And then from there, in that colonized block, you cut it open to fruit. And his cultures, I've noticed, they just colonize super fast, never had any problems with contamination. And so I have some lion's mane colonizing right now in some jars with some little, they look like little brains in them. And the lion's mane is probably about 2 months out, just because of the time frame. Everything is delayed by about 2 months in this industry. It's not like, let's say, hydroponics, where you can get a plant clone and then you can just put it in there and then it will just start sprouting, and then in like a few weeks you'll have something you can sell. For this, it takes months, actually, sometimes.
I still feel like that's relatively fast compared to, like, for example, growing tomatoes. It takes like a good 4 just for me to like see a little tomato starting before it gets ripened. And then on top of that, the mushrooms tend to grow, I don't know, I'm just guessing that they grow at the same time, so you're getting like a bigger yield at once.
Yeah, definitely. That is true. With, like you said, with tomatoes, that's a good example. I'd say fruits, they do take about almost a whole summer sometimes just to get something out of them that's worthwhile. But with these, it is kind of impressive to be able to go from nothing, to be able to go from a little tissue culture all the way to a full size, edible mushroom in like 2 months or something like that. And in the case of people who just have the pleasure of fruiting them, people who buy grow kits and stuff like that, you can just take them and cut them open. They're already colonized, and then they fruit for you in maybe 10 or 15 days. So that is pretty incredible about them. And it definitely makes it more nimble. Like if you want to change it up, which variety is really important in this industry. When you do change it up, it's really easy to do that. It's kind of just plug and play.
And how many different kinds of species would species be the right way to say it? Like of mushroom, like different. Are they exactly species of mushroom? Are they type? Yeah, we'll say species.
Yeah, we could say.
I think plants, they're like different species too. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. That I wish I had a better term for that. I'm not a scientist, but I guess the whole industry is half DIY, hacker, half science, and there's a lot of overlap between the two, and some non-negotiables, like, for instance, I need a flow hood to be able to do most of my work successfully, because a flow hood is just a giant HEPA filter. It's about 4 feet by 3 feet and does nothing but blow out laminar sterile air over the surface you're working with to prevent contamination, because everything that you're working with is a food source for bacteria. So that's a non-negotiable. But growing in buckets or making spawn plugs and then putting them in Tupperware or some crazy thing like that, that is something that you can hack at and have a lot of fun with. And that's something that I want to do more of. I have a friend who does that, and it's very, very impressive what he can, I guess you could say, get away with without a lot of the industry equipment. And I'm like, that's where I want to shoot for, less complex, like the most simple way that you can get from A to Z. But yeah, it's half and half. And I would say the best term I could think of is genetics. A lot of people talk in terms of genetics. So if you're saying like oyster, I have oyster mushroom, then a lot of people, it's Pleurotheus is I think that's the way that you pronounce it, Pleurotheus. That's the actual species or genus or whatever you call it. And then the genetics beyond that, a lot of people just call it genetics. Like I have good genetics. It's or I have like fast fruiting genetics, or this particular genetics is very, very quick colonizing or something like that. And then you can isolate genetics too by doing agar work and prompting the mycelium to do sexual reproduction instead of asexual reproduction and create new genetics by applying selective pressures to it. For instance, changes in food source or maybe changes in temperature or something like that. And looking at the different zones of inhibition and the different zones of convergence. There's a lot of different methods. You can get very granular, but it's very open to hacking, I guess you could say. And that's the beauty of it. That's what I love about it, because especially since you're more akin to the, I guess you could say, prepper or minimalism of the whole, this whole industry. It really is a way that, because I love to garden, but this I also see as a way where if you had a cave, you could grow mushrooms in it in Texas without any electricity whatsoever. It's just, all you need are little spawn plugs. You have to keep them alive. That means keeping them cool. But as soon as they enter a food source, they go out of dormancy, and then they just start colonizing. So you could have a whole bag of spawn plugs, let's say. You could have a whole bag of substrate, which would be sawdust or something like that. And as long as you pasteurize it and take out most of the competition in terms of bacteria, you could take a spawn plug, throw it in one of these buckets, and mix it up. And then after it colonizes, you just pop the lid open, starts fruiting out the sides, and that's it. So it's really interesting, and it can be very, very low. If you know how to do it right, it can be very, very low threshold entry. That's really important to me because it allows people the ability to create these things in their own homes, reproducibility, extensibility, where you can create your own food, local, no supply chain. I love that concept. So it's something I'm going to be pursuing more, but you have to walk before you can run. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm just learning the industry, experimenting, making it profitable, and then I can dedicate more time into looking to, okay, how do I improve it?
That's awesome. I'm super excited too. Especially, I'm happy that I found you now at the start, right? And then kind of see it grow, right? I mean, I've bought your the blue oysters. I absolutely love them. I'm waiting for the lion's mane, but I plan on coming back not this weekend because it's 4th of July, but the following weekend and picking up some more blue oysters for sure. I had no idea how easy it was to make mushrooms, but because it's weird. It seems like there's a little bit of complexity, but then at the same time, simplicity, where it's not totally fail-proof, but almost fail-proof.
Yeah, definitely. It's just like any other organism. It has its demands for climate and atmosphere and food, but as long as you know how to work within those, the sky really is the limit. When I came down here, I took a road trip through Virginia, and I did an Airbnb at this guy's place up in the hills of Virginia. And he was up on this big limestone cliff, and he had his own solar and water and a little greenhouse. And he was actually taking logs, and he would soak them. He would pull them out, and then he would put shiitake plugs in them. And he was doing Shiitake Log Farming. And the logs would just sit there because of the climate that they could withstand. He was in the perfect environment. They colonized the log. They would fruit out the side. He would just pick them, put them in a bin, and take them to the farmer's market. So I can't think of anything simpler than that. I can't think of anything more fail-proof, like you were saying, than that. Low tech. So.
And then especially too for preppers, you were saying that it has the small space and ease of it. You also mentioned that you're a gardener. Do you think that growing mushrooms is easier than a garden?
Yes, I would say in Texas, it actually is. It's not as the only reason why I say that is because I do have a raised garden bed, and I had the previous season and this season. And as much as I love it, the heat here, for extended periods of drought, kills the progress that of the plants that you are growing. And they can grow fine up until that point where you have a drought and then they die. And there's ways to control for that. But even if you were to control for that, you still have pests. You still have hail that could destroy the plants that you intend to grow. The place where I have it, one day I was up until maybe like 12 a.m. and I heard a weird noise and I realized they were fogging for mosquitoes. I just want to run out there and say, hey, dude, don't spray that on my plants. I eat those. So there's a lot of little things you can't control for, and it is difficult to farm. The stuff that you get cannot be reproduced through mushrooms because, a tomato is not a mushroom. You still need tomatoes, but with the mushroom farming, it's just so much easier to take unutilized space. A house is essentially underutilized space. You're in it if you're working from home, you're in it more. But if you're working from an office, let's say typical person's life, they're in it for maybe 13 hours a day, something like that. When they come home from work, eat, sleep, and then leave in the morning. And they have all, let's say, these rooms where they're not really doing anything with, or you have an apartment you're not really doing anything with, and you're cooling it or you're heating it. So whereas you would have to go out and it'd be hot and you would be doing like farming, getting eaten alive by mosquitoes and stuff like that, any average person can just take this climate controlled bubble that we've only now in the last 80 years had the pleasure of the entirety of human history being surrounded by climate controlled bubbles, free of rain, free of wind, and all kinds of other stuff, to take and use for something like mushroom farming. And as long as you have an area, I would say 10 feet by 10 feet, you could grow enough to do the kind of production that I'm doing right now. If you have an area for a shelf, maybe about 5 feet by 3 feet, 5 feet tall by 3 feet deep, and maybe 2 feet wide or so, they call them Martha tents. You could take that, you could turn that into a pretty low effort fruiting chamber. And then the rest is really up to you how much space you want to invest in the other parts of the hobby. You can have a little, let's say, still air box, or you can use an oven to inoculate grain. Or you can have a whole room with a flow hood and stuff like that for your lab. Or you can have none of that, and you can go online and you can buy little spawn plugs, and then that were produced in a sterile laboratory. You take a little spawn plug, and then you can put that in bulk substrate that you buy online, and then fruit them from your tent. So it's really, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but the bare minimum of space is so ridiculously small to really cultivate a decent number of mushrooms that that any average person could do it from an apartment, or even if they share a dorm with someone, they could do it.
Yeah, that's crazy to think, especially because the protein, some of them have the different vitamins that they have and the fiber. It's almost like at the end of the day, if you can't have all the things, mushrooms give you the most of what you can have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I would say mushrooms are a good supplement, and a lot of people do take them for supplement. Basically, the food that we get, a lot of the nutrition is mostly gone from it because it's either been irradiated to control for pests, or it's been the nutrient content is gone from the what do they call that? California. There's a word for it, but it's essentially the logistics system we have of growing food in other countries, goes on a container. That container gets to us maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, and a lot of the nutrient content is gone from the food. So you can supplement that with, let's say, fresh mushrooms that have, like you said, high fiber, high good nutrition in terms of protein, vitamins, minerals. And I'm not a doctor or a nutritionist or anything like that, or I guess dietitian, but from what I've read, the health benefits, the end health benefits for people, for instance, even with lion's mane, the neurological benefits, it's essentially an adaptogen. It helps you with focus. It helps you potentially, from my understanding, some mushrooms actually help you with neurogenesis, like growing new neurons in your brain. So there's a lot of health benefits that you can get from mushrooms. That's why the medicinal mushroom industry is so large. Like, people buy tinctures and powders and stuff like that before they would even go out to buy a mushroom to cook, you know?